Okay, so we just got three possible claims for why Australia has so much skin cancer, and we are going to explore this first claim that Australia gets more sunlight than other areas, and that is why it gets lots of skin cancer. So we have some new data. Um, this claim one is easy to figure out because it's easy to measure how much sunlight each spot in the world gets. So this here is the world sunlight map. It shows how much sunlight different places on Earth receive per year. We will use this map to analyze claim one, which stated that Australia has high levels of skin cancer because it receives more sunlight than other areas. So if we look here at the color key, these darker colors mean more sunlight. As we get lighter and lighter and lighter, there's less and less sunlight. So let's look at question 48 in our notes. It says, use the world sunlight map and the world skin cancer map to compare several countries to each other. If you need help locating the countries, use Google or ask a friend or ask your teacher. But in the video, I'll just walk you through it. So, countries to compare. First of all, we're going to compare Brazil and Australia. So, I'm going to zoom in here on the sunlight map. Australia labeled down here. Brazil is right here. If we compare Brazil and Australia, they look like they have the same amount of sunlight. They're both in this 2,000 to 3,000 range. So, claim one says that Australia has high levels of skin cancer because it gets a lot of sunlight. Well, Brazil also gets a lot of sunlight. In fact, the exact same amount. So, if claim one is true, we would expect that Brazil would have the same levels of skin cancer. Let's go over here to our skin cancer map, and we're going to compare Brazil and Australia, but they don't have the same amount of skin cancer. They have the same amount of sunlight, but not the same amount of skin cancer. So down here in our table, Brazil versus Australia, which has more sunlight? I'm just going to write same. Which has more cancer? Australia. So, according to Brazil and Australia, we don't think claim is one is true because if they have the same amount of sunlight, we would think they would have the same amount of cancer. But let's look at some other examples just to be sure. So we're going to compare Egypt and Australia. Egypt is here in the northeastern part of Africa, and it's actually darker than Australia, meaning this region here gets more sunlight than Australia. So here, Egypt versus Australia, which one gets more sunlight? We're going to write Egypt. Now let's look at the skin cancer map. Which one has higher levels of skin cancer? It looks like Australia. So for this one, Egypt versus Australia, if claim was one was true, and the amount of sunlight is the reason that there's lots of cancer, we would actually expect Egypt to have higher levels of cancer because it gets more sunlight than Australia does. But it, in fact, has less cancer than Australia. So claim one is probably false based on comparing Egypt and Australia. Let's look at Japan and Australia. Japan is this island right here. It is getting less sun than Australia, so Australia gets more. And which has more skin cancer? Comparing Japan and Australia, looks like Australia. So in this case, comparing Japan and Australia, this does support claim one. So we have one comparison that supports claim one and two comparisons that go against claim one. So let's get a fourth comparison. We're going to look at United States and Australia. United States here is mostly orange. There's a tiny little bit of red here, but there's also some yellow here and yellow up here. So they counterbalance, and we're just going to say that the United States is mostly orange, which is the same color as Australia. So we're going to say they get the same amount of sunlight. Now, which has more cancer? Australia. Definitely darker than the United States. So here, since they get the same amount of sunlight, if claim one was true, we'd expect them to have the same amount of cancer, but that's not the case. So this also goes against claim one. So three of our comparisons were against claim one. One of our comparisons was for claim one. Overall, claim one is probably false. So question 49, using the table above, is the amount of sunlight what determines or causes the amount of cancer? Probably not. It is probably something else. No, the sunlight is not the amount of sunlight, I should say. The amount of sunlight is not the reason that Australia has higher rates than other areas on Earth. All right, that was 49 that we just answered. Let's go on to question 50. So, 50, I believe, is fill in the blank. There's two parts to the fill in the blank. So, based on what we have learned about how light from the sun can cause skin cancer, we might expect claim 1 to be supported by the evidence, because we do know that sunlight causes skin cancer, so we expect more sunlight should cause more cancer. That's what this says. More sunlight should mean a higher rate of skin cancer. This is true for many places on Earth, but it's not the reason that Australia's rates are so high. And we found that out because we know that other areas have actually more sunlight but less skin cancer. So continue on question 50. This is the second part of the fill in the blank down here. We notice that Australia has a higher rate of skin cancer than Brazil and Egypt, even though it gets the same amount of sunlight as Brazil and less sunlight than Egypt. If claim 1 were correct, then Australia should have the same amount of cancer as Brazil and actually less cancer than Egypt. This is not the case, so claim 1 is false. Here, we're crossing out claim 1 because we know claim 1 is not true. Now that we know that something else besides sunlight must be affecting Australia's skin cancer rate, we can eliminate claim 1 and start focusing on the other two claims. And that'll be chapter 2 and 3 that we explore these next two claims. So question 51, the last thing for this set of guided notes, and then you'll have a writing assignment. So, follow-up writing activities. Looking at Brazil and Australia in the World Sunlight Map, what ideas do you have for how or why the skin cancer rates of Australia are so much higher, even though they receive the same amount of sunlight? So, what are your thoughts now on the reason for Australia's high rates of skin cancer?